Hello everyone, you're welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Amaka. In this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make this beautiful palazzo jumpsuit you're seeing on the thumbnail. Now, if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. So this is the fabric I'll be using for this tutorial. I have 3 yards of fabric here. Now I'm going to start by drafting the upper part. Now I have my front panel and my back panel here. Now this is my zipper allowance. So I'm going to be taking my measurements like this. So this is my starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. Now I'm going to start by taking my neck measurement. The front neck width is 3.5 inches and the front neck depth is 3 inches. The back neck width is also 3.5 inches and the back neck depth is 1 inch. Now, if you check the neckline, you will see that the neckline has opening at the front, which is like a V. So that V neckline is going to be 8 inches. So I'm going to connect the points. Now, this is my lining. After drafting on the lining, I'm going to transfer it to the main fabric. Now to achieve the V neckline, from here I'm going to go in by ½ inch and I'll connect it to this point. So the next thing I'll do is to take the shoulder measurement. Half of the shoulder measurement I'm working with is 7 inches. Now I'm going to mark 7 inches here. Now from this 7 inches point, I'm going to mark the sleeve length. The sleeve length I'm working with is 6 inches. Plus ½ inch, which I'm going to use to join it to the band. You know, this is a cut together shoulder. Now from this point, I'm going to come down by 1.5 inches and I'll connect it to the neckline. Now I'm going to take the vertical waist measurement. Now my waist point is 16 inches, but because this jumpsuit has band, I'm going to subtract the band length from 16 inches. The band length is 2 inches. So I'm going to subtract 2 inches from 16 inches and that gives you 14 inches. So my waist point is 14 inches plus ½ inch seam allowance. So I'm marking 14 inches plus ½ inch seam allowance and I'll connect the points. So the next measurement I'm going to take is my bust point measurement. Now my bust point measurement is 10 inches. I'm using now this jumpsuit is going to have that. That's why I'm working with my bust point measurement. So my bust point measurement is 10 inches. Now I'm going to connect the points. So this is my bust point measurement and this is my waist point measurement. To impute my dart, I'm going to be working with my nipple to nipple measurement. Half of my nipple to nipple measurement is 4 inches. So I'm going to mark 4 inches here. Now I'm taking my measurement from this line. I'm taking my measurement this way from this line, away from my zipper line. So I'll connect this point to this point, just like this. Now from my bust point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch from my bust point. While from the waist point, I'm going to mark ½ inch on both sides of this line, just like this. And I'll connect the points. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my round sleeve measurement. Now from this point, I'm going to mark my round sleeve measurement. The round sleeve measurement I'm working with is 10 inches. So I'm going to mark 10 inches here. You know the sleeve is big. So I'm going to mark 10 inches here. Now I'm going to check what I have here. Now what I have here is 13.5 inches. So this 13.5 inches, I'm going to bring it down here. I'm going to mark 13.5 inches here and I'll connect this point to this point. Just like this. So this is my sleeve length. Now from here to here is my sleeve length. So now on my waist point, I'm going to take my waist measurement of my waist point. My waist circumference divided by 4 gives you 7.5 inches. Plus this 1 inch for that, I have to return it. Now I'm returning this 1 inch for that. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'm marking 1.5 inches seam allowance. Now I'm going to connect this point to this point. I'm connecting this point to this point. Just like this. Now from this point, I'm going to come in by 1.5 inches and I'll mark. And I'll connect this point to this point. Just like this. Now this part is no longer useful to me. I'm going to cut it off. So the next thing I'm going to do is to add my shoulder seam allowance. I'm using 1/2 inch for my shoulder seam allowance. So on the back panel, I'm going to eliminate the zipper bulge. Now from here, I'm going to mark 1 inch and I'll connect it to this point. And I'll cut it. Take note, I'm cutting the back panel first. Then after cutting the back, I'm going to trim off the front neckline. Now I'm going to notch the darts so that I'm going to transfer it to the back panel. Now I'm going to separate the front panel from the back panel. Now I'll remove the back panel and I'll trim the front. And I'll also trim the V part. So this is the front panel. And this is the back. The back panel is 2. So I'm going to use the lining to cut the main fabric. Now this is the lower part of my jumpsuit. This is my starting point, which is also going to serve as the waist point. So I'm going to subtract the upper part of the jumpsuit from the full length. The full length is 60 inches. So I'm going to subtract 16 inches from 60 inches. So I'm going to place my tape this way. Now see how I'm placing my tape, and I'll mark 60 inches. Plus 2 inches hemming allowance. I'm using 2 inches for my hemming allowance. Now see how I'm placing my tape. I'm placing 16 inches on the starting point, and I'm going to mark 60 inches plus 2 inches hemming allowance. So the next thing I'm going to do is to mark my waist to my hip point. My waist to my hip point is 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here. Now to get the crotch depth, you will have to divide your hip circumference by 4. And whatever it gives you, you add 3 inches for ease. Now my hip circumference divided by 4 is 10 inches plus 3 inches. That gives you 13 inches. So I'm going to mark 13 inches here. Now I added 3 inches for ease because this is a palazzo pant. It's a free pant. That's why I added 3 inches for ease. Now I'm going to extend the points. So this is my crotch depth and this is my hip point. I'll connect the points. Now on the waist point, I'm going to take the hip measurement on the waist point. My hip circumference divided by 4 gives you 10 inches plus 2 inches for ease. You know this is a free pant, so I'm using 2 inches for ease plus 1 inch seam allowance. So what I have here now is 13 inches. So this 13 inches I have here, I'm going to bring it down to the crotch line. So I'm going to mark 13 inches on the crotch line and I'll connect the points. Now this is my waist point, my hip point and my crotch depth. Now for my crotch extension, I'm going to be working with 2 inches. So from this point, I'm going to mark 2 inches and I'll connect it to this point. You can also do this with your free hand. It all depends on how you want to do it. But it shouldn't be too deep. So this is my crotch extension. Now this pant is not going to have that. but I'm going to pleat it. It's going to have pleats. Now I'm going to check what I have here. Now this measurement I have here, 16 inches. I'm going to take it down to the hem. Now I'll mark 16 inches here, plus 1 inch seam allowance. Now on the crotch, I'm also going to add 1 inch seam allowance. While here, I'm going to add half inch seam allowance here. Now you might be wondering why I added half inch seam allowance here after adding 1 inch here. Now this 1 inch I added here, I'm going to use it to sew here, while this half inch, I'm going to use it to join the crotch. So I'm going to connect the points. So I'm going to add my seam allowance on the waist. So I'm going to cut it. So now this is the front panel. I'm going to split it. Now take note, this fabric is placed on fold. So I'm cutting it into two. I'm going to use the front panel to cut the back panel. So now this is the front panel. I also have the back panel here, and the back panel is placed on fold. Now I'm going to draft the back panel. Now on the crotch extension, I'm going to mark 2.5 inches. While on the waist, I'm going to mark 2 inches. And I'll also mark 2 inches here. On the hem, I'm going to mark 2.5 inches, the same measurement I have on the crotch extension. So I'm going to bring it down here, 2.5 inches. I'm going to mark 2.5 inches on the hem. Now here, now on the center back, I'm going to go up by 1 inch. Now if I'm drafting a normal pant, I'll go up by 1.5 inches, but because this is a jumpsuit and I'm trying to avoid zipper bulge, I'm going to go up by 1 inch. So I'm going to mark 1 inch here, and I'll connect it to this point. Just like this. I'm going to slantly connect it back to the waistline, to the front waistline, and I'll cut it. So I'm going to notch. Now I'm going to remove the front panel, and I'll split the back panel. Now I've used the lining to cut the main fabric. So for the band, I have two here and it was cut on fold. The front panel has two pieces and it was cut on fold. For here, I have four pieces. Two is going to be for one side and two will be for one side. Now the width of my band is 3 inches. 1 inch is for seam allowance and 2 inches is the actual length of my band. I've cut out those two things by the side, the thing that is carrying the button. Now the length of this is 7.5 inches by 3 inches. So now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to find the midpoint of this. Now this is the midpoint. And from here, I'm going to go in by 1 inch and I'll mark. And I'll go in by 1 inch from here and I'll mark. And I'll connect this point to this point, just like this. See how I'm going to connect it. Now you can also do this with your free hand. But this is how I was able to achieve this design, but you can also do it with your free hand. And I'll cut it. Now I'm going to cut 4 of these. I've already cut 3. Now I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 will be for one side and 2 will be for the other side. Now I'm going to cut my pocket. This is the fabric I'll be using for my pocket. So I'm going to fold this fabric into 4. Now I've folded it into 2. I'm going to fold it again into 4. So I've folded it into 4. Now I'm just going to place my hand this way and trace out my hand. I'm just going to, I don't have a special way of cutting my pocket. This is how I cut my pocket. So I'm just going to, just mark and I will cut. I think this is the easiest way of cutting your pocket. No much protocol. So I'm just going to mark 7 inches here. I just want to have 7 inches here. I just want my pocket to be 7 inches. And I'll cut. So this is it. Now I have 4 pieces here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I'm going to show you how to couple your jumpsuit. So this is the front panel. Now I'm going to start by closing the dart. After closing the dart, I'll also close the lining, the dart of the lining. Then I'll place the lining on the main fabric, right side facing right side, and I'll sew the neck with 1/2 inch seam allowance. After sewing the neck with 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'll notch. After notching, I'll push the seam allowance on the lining and top stitch. Now before I start sewing, I'll iron interfacing on the main fabric. Now after that, I'm going to sew this side with 1/2 inch seam allowance and I'll sew here with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now for the back panel, I'm going to start by closing the dart. So I'll close the dart. After closing the dart, I'll place the lining on the main fabric, right side facing right side, and I'll sew. I'll start by sewing the neck. I'll sew the neck with 1/2 inch seam allowance. After sewing, I'll notch. After notching, I'll push the seam allowance on the lining and top stitch. After that, I'm going to sew here with 1/2 inch seam allowance and I'll sew the zipper allowance with 1/2 inch seam allowance. So this is the lower part of my jumpsuit. Now I'm going to start by fixing the pocket. Now this is the crotch. This is the crotch and this is the side. So from the side, I'm going to come down by 1.5 inches and I'll mark. Now I'm going to fix my pocket from here on the 1.5 inches that I came down by. I'll sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now let me illustrate with pins. Now after sewing with 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to push the seam allowance on the pocket and top stitch. Now I'll take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew. I'll top stitch. I'll sew this way. Now the same thing I'll do here. I'm also going to do it on this one and I'll also do it on the back panel. I'm also going to sew the crotch. Now I'll place the crotch right side facing right side and I'll sew. Now the same way I'm going to sew the front panel, that's how I'm going to sew the back panel too. I'm going to sew the crotch with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now after sewing, this is what I have. I've sewn here and I've also sewn here, but the shoulder is still open. I've also closed the dart. So this is the back panel. I've also closed the dart and I sewed here with 1/2 inch seam allowance and here, and I sewed the neck with 1/2 inch seam allowance with the zipper allowance. I sewed with half-inch seam allowance. Now I have my band here. I've ironed interfacing on my band and I have to sew it together just to secure it. So I'm going to place it this way. Now I'll place it this way and I'll sew it with half-inch seam allowance. Right side facing right side, I'll sew it with half-inch seam allowance and I'll pull it down. So for the back, now I've also sewn the back and I have my band here. Now my band is double. You see that it's double and I ironed the interfacing on it. So I'm going to place it this way. I'll place it on the upper part and I'll sew with half-inch seam allowance. I'll do the same thing here. I'll sew with half-inch seam allowance. Now the shoulder is still open. I've not sewn the shoulder. Now for this, I have to sew it with half-inch seam allowance and I'll turn it to the right side. Now I've done this one. I've turned it to the right side and I top stitched. Now this is my pant. I've fixed the pocket and I've also sewn the crotch. Now I've sewn the crotch with half-inch seam allowance and I ironed it down. I notched and ironed. Now I've also sewn the pocket. Now after sewing the pocket, I had to push the seam allowance on the pocket and top stitched. Now this is the front panel. Let me show you how to pleat your pants. Now my waist circumference is 30 inches. 30 divided by 4 gives you 7.5 inches. So which means one of these is 7.5 inches. Now this is 7.5 inches here and this is 7.5 inches. So I'm going to pleat each side till I get that 7.5 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance, which I'm going to use to join this side. That gives you 8.5 inches. So what I need on each side is 8.5 inches. So what I have here is 13.5 inches. So the midpoint is 6 3/4. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pinch this 6 3/4. I'm going to pleat it to this point. Now see what I'm doing. So what I need here is 8.5 inches. Now what I have here is 8.5 inches. So I'm going to pin it down and I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'll sew it. So I'm also going to do the same thing here and I'll do the same thing on the back panel too. So I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew it this way just to secure the pleats. So now I've pleated the front panel and I've also sewn it. Now this is it. I've sewn it. So now this is it. I've pleated it. Now this is a crotch. This is a pocket. This is a pleat. I've also pleated this side. And this is a crotch. Now there is something I want to do on the front panel. I want to eliminate the smile lines. You know that bulge that we used to have on the front panel? I want to eliminate it. So now I'm going to fold back my pant. I'm going to fold it into two. Now this part, this is the crotch, the front crotch. I'm trying to arrange it very well. So this is what I'm going to do. Now from this point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. From this point, from this crotch point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch and I'll mark. Now connect it to this point. So after sewing this part, now I'm going to come down by 1 inch from here. I'll mark 1 inch and I'll connect it to this part. So I'm going to connect it to this part and I'll cut it off. Just like this. So you see what I did? Now I'm going to cut off this part. I'll cut it off. You know that bulge we used to have on the front panel, the front of our pants, that folding, that's what I want to eliminate. So I'm going to cut off this part. So I've cut it off. Now after cutting, now this is what I have. So I'll show you how to couple it. Now after eliminating the smile lines, I'm going to attach the upper part to the lower part just like this. And I'm going to sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now for this, after sewing, I'm going to fix this by the side. And I'll sew it. I'll fix this one and sew it just to secure it. Now for the back panel, this is the lower part of the back panel and I have my zipper allowance here and this is the upper part. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to place this way and I will sew. I'm going to sew here with half-inch seam allowance. I'll join it with half-inch seam allowance. And I'm also going to do the same thing on the other one. On this other one, I'm also going to sew with half-inch seam allowance, just like this. Now you see that I have my zipper allowance here. Now I'm going to fix my zipper here. Now this is my front panel, so I'm going to show you how to attach the front panel to the back panel. So I have the front panel and the back panel here. Now this is how I'm going to join the shoulders. I'm going to place it this way. I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to place it this way and I'll sew right side facing right side. I'm going to sew with half-inch seam allowance. Now this is lining facing lining and main fabric to main fabric. Now I'm going to sew it this way with half-inch seam allowance and I'll sew it to the lining. Now the same way I'm going to sew here, I'm also going to sew here the same way. So that's for the shoulder. So for the side, I'm going to sew the side with 1-inch seam allowance, just like this. I'll sew it and sew it into the pocket and sew it down to the hem. Now the same way I'll sew here, that's how I'll sew the other side. So I'll sew this side the same way. So after sewing the sides, I'll sew the crotch. Now I'm going to place the crotch together, right side facing right side, and I'll sew with 1-inch seam allowance. I'll sew it down to the hem, and I'll sew this part down to the hem. So after sewing it that way, I'm going to turn the back and I'll fix the zipper. So I'm going to do all these things that I just said and show you the outcome. Now after sewing, this is what I have. Now I've joined the shoulders, I've closed the sides, and I've also closed the crotch. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to fix the turn up. So because of the turn up, I didn't close the fabric completely. I closed it halfway. You see that it's still open here. Now I have my band here. I'm going to use it for the turn up. Now what I have here is 4 inches by 24 inches. So now I'm going to fold it into two and I'm going to sew. Now I'm going to sew it from the wrong side. Now I'm going to place it in such a way that the right side will be facing the wrong side, and I'll sew with half-inch seam allowance. And I'll sew it to this point. I'll sew it to this point. Now after sewing, I'm going to turn it to the right side. Then I'll cut off the excess I have here and I'll sew here. So the same thing I'm going to do here, I'm also going to do here. So after sewing, I'm going to give it a thorough press and I will hem the lower part. Now you see the sleeve. Now this is the turn up. This is what it looks like. And I've also fixed the button. I've fixed these buttons. Now this is the back. I've also fixed the zipper. This is what it looks like. Very neat. This jumpsuit is beautiful. You need to give it a trial. So I'm going to wear it and show you what it looks like. If you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. Share this video with your friends. Share this video in your sewing groups. Subscribe to my channel if you've not done so. Feel free to ask questions. I'll be in the comment section to answer all your questions. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.